Strong Enough merch is now available. Go to strongenoughpod.com and check out all the stuff that you can get so that you'll have those daily reminders that you are strong enough and you are worth it. Welcome to the Strong Enough podcast, where we talk about the challenges and celebrate the triumphs of people just like you. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share about a toxic work environment that she experienced. She's going to give you some tips and tricks on what you can do if you're going through a challenging time at work. And then she's going to lighten the mood by telling us about a book she authored with some crazy dating stories. Please help me welcome Cathy Berra. Cathy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am also well. As I mentioned to you a moment ago, it is snowing, and a lot of people know that that is my happy place.
Yes. Well, it's a good spring. It's good for the spring, that we're getting a little more moisture, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And I try to look at it in that environmental way. I'm just here for the moisture, and that's all that matters to me. But
That's right.
I do love the snow.
Okay.
Well, I would love it if you would take a minute and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Littleton, Colorado, and I have been back here about 7 years. I was on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. for about 20 years. I raised my son there. I was a single mom for a long time, but I worked in telecom. I worked for some philanthropists for about 10 years. They're very wealthy philanthropists, and I'm actually still doing some consulting work for them now. But she became a U.S. ambassador, so I was very involved in the political part of things in D.C. And then I went to the State Department, and I worked in the Division of Cybersecurity for a few years before I came back to Colorado to help my aging parents. And I've been here since 2014, back in the Denver Littleton area. So I have a horse, and I ride my horse all the time. And but I have some stories for you, so I'm excited to get into the nitty gritty of that.
I am as well. And you hit a lot of cool things there. So I am from the East Coast and made my way here. I do love horses. I do not have my own, but I volunteer at the local horse center here. So I get
Nice.
to hang out with the horses, and my favorite are the mini horses,
Oh
if
yeah.
I'm being honest. So you talked about a couple things there, a couple different jobs that you've had. And what we were discussing earlier is that when we think about relationships, sometimes we forget that our work life is a relationship of its own and a dynamic of its own. And I know that you have a pretty interesting story to tell about a not so great work environment. And that's what we're going to chat about today.
Sounds good. Yes. And that happened literally when I came back to Colorado. So the employment that I had in Washington, D.C., I never had anything like this happen. So I don't know if you want me to start into the story now, or do you want me to tell you now?
Yeah, I would
Oh,
love to hear. So tell us now, we're not going to say, where this job is or what the industry was, because that wouldn't really be fair. We never name our abusers
yes.
on this podcast. But I would love to hear a little bit about what led you to this place and how it felt in the beginning.
Well, it was interesting because I moved back here for a job, the first job I had. And again, I'm in my 50s, so we're dealing with Colorado and a lot of millennials. So it's a really interesting dynamic between the younger and the older generations in the workplace, because there's competition. It's very interesting. That's all I have to say. So the first position I had, she moved me out here, and it was more of a similar position to the one I had in DC, where I was what they call the family liaison. Let's just put it that way, for some very wealthy people. And the first 8 months was going fine. She walked into my office one day and said, "This isn't working." So I, it was a shock. That was not the worst situation. So in between that time and finding another job, that's when I got the horse. Long story about that. But the job that I took eventually, um, it was, I had to search. And again, I think I applied for 275 jobs in Colorado, because as an older person, I'm competing with this younger generation, and it makes sense. They pay them less, and I have been working for a long time, so I expect XYZ, but it doesn't really happen in Denver. The cost of living is the same as DC, but the salaries are not. So, anyway, I took this position and I was hired as one specific thing. And let's just say I'm a writer. I was at the Division of Cybersecurity and I was a writer, and I'm a writer. That's what I do. So I was hired as a writer for this company. And within, I want to say the first month, they said, well, we have this woman in another department. She can't seem to keep up with what she's doing. She's younger. Can you just help her for a few weeks? And I said, fine. But not, that's the other issue with corporations today. You are hired, and then you're pretty much at their beck and call to whatever need they have. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to stay where you are, even though you've signed a contract and whatever. So I went, it was maybe a month into it. I went over to help this young woman. And coming from a very conservative environment in Washington, D.C., Colorado has been a shocker. I'm not going to lie. Everywhere I go, people say I still overdress, but that's okay. But the environment at this place was all literally, when I walked into this segment of the company, was a lot of former military people. And that is a different world altogether.
Mhm.
But this young woman would come in and she was just dressed in shabby clothing. She took like 11 cigarette breaks a day. It was just no wonder she couldn't get the work done, right? So, anyway, I interjected myself and I was trying to help her. But along the way, the environment in this building and in this company was not only toxic, it was completely inappropriate. I mean, the conversations, the mannerisms, the comments. And I would look around and say, are we in the 2020s? I mean, are the where are you? This is just bizarre. And of course, everywhere you look, there's HR signs, this, the harassment, sexual harassment, this. And I'm thinking, how is this even possible that these conversations are being had? I started documenting it because I thought, okay, this is insanity. I had at one point some of the men were speaking about, well, I'm talking about N word, I'm talking about the P word, I'm talking. I mean, it was just like, where am I? And I remember looking at the one gentleman when he had been saying the N word, and I said, I was in my office. I said, could you please not use that term? I said, this is completely inappropriate. He says, well, I'll tell you how we'll deal with that. And he slammed my door shut of my office. And I thought, hmm. So again, I documented for a year. And it was the most stressful situation because I think a lot of people are in situations where they can't quit their job. They have
Mhm.
to tolerate it, right? They have to stay because they have a family or they have, their second income. And it's just, it leaves you in a really desperate situation. So I was never in a situation like that in my life. And I didn't really know what to do because I had come from this very highly professional environment and I'm now in this, what the heck is going on, right? So again, I documented, I want to say for over a year. And finally, the woman that I was helping, and I never left that spot because she could never keep up. Let's just say that also.
Mhm.
So my life became her help, right? And that's not what I was hired for. It was just nothing I had ever had an interest in doing. So many people will probably relate to this too, as we all know that HR is not there to protect the employee, they're there to protect the company. So I presented this information to HR after a year. Actually, I emailed them and I said, here's the deal. I want to be moved off this program. This is why. Here's the documentation. I put it in email so I could, have
Mhm.
record. And then I went over to the HR department and they pretty much said, well, you know, we can't guarantee you if we move you into another program, it's not going to be the same environment because every company has a culture. And I said, so basically, if I'm talking about the N word in front of, African American clients and they want to do $1 billion deal or whatever, that's okay. I mean, so I really, it was a struggle. It was like,
Mhm.
what are you saying to me? And so basically my situation turned into, I mean, I don't think I've ever been so stressed out in my life. I just couldn't believe it was actually occurring in this modern day. And this was literally right before the Me Too thing started coming out really big.
Mhm.
And so I ended up getting an attorney, and going through that route because basically they were not going to move me anywhere. So, again, I can't talk about the details of
Mhm.
any of that, but it's just so interesting to me that you have all this HR, all this protection you think you have in a company, and in a big company especially, and you don't. You really don't. And it's just based on what they decide is going to be their priority, right? They're going to protect the company more so than the employee. So that's the story. And from that I learned a lot, but I also, it was hard because it was hard for me to find that job in Colorado.
Mhm.
But everything works out in the end, and that's how I transitioned to what I'm doing now. And it was also serendipitous because both of my parents were getting older and they started becoming ill, and so I was available to help them. So
Mhm.
life always kind of works out. But I was also lucky that I was financially able to say, kind of screw you, and I really did, because I couldn't stand it anymore. So
You brought up so many good points, and I want to hit on a few of them just to really reiterate for the audience. And the first one is going to be your comment about HR. I think that a lot of people do have that misconception that HR is going to be there to protect us, the employees.
right,
And that is false. And
exactly,
I have had a very similar situation to you in that when I reported a situation to HR, I thought that they were going to have my back and protect me. And basically, once they learned that everything I was telling them was true, I got shut out. Everything got covered up, and it left me feeling really horrible, even
hmm,
worse, honestly, than I had before. So I love that you said that you did end up getting an attorney. And I am not an attorney, but I would advocate that anyone that has an issue, a serious issue, and they're going to talk to HR, get an attorney
right,
because nobody's looking out for you, even though HR will tell you that they are and make you think that they are. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. How was it for you in that reporting process? What did it feel like when they're telling you, well, this is just the way it is and this is what you're going to have to deal with?
well, and that's what's sad because I did look up all of the HR documentation that they provide at orientation. And, when you come into a company, these are their policies and standards and procedures, and this is what you do. And I had it in front of me, and I highlighted, what that they had violated. And that's when she got a little nervous. And so, at a certain point, they presented, an option, shall we say.
Mm.
And I looked at them and I said, I'm going to get an attorney. And that's when they really flipped because I think they knew that it was completely inappropriate what was going on, and they were covering it up. And honestly, after I left, I honestly think I should have filed an EEOC, which I did. I was too stressed out. I just wanted to get the heck out of there. I didn't want it to
Mhm.
prolong anymore. And I was mortified. I was just literally mortified about what was going on. And I didn't do that, but at the same time, I think I'm glad I did get out of there. But it was very fascinating to see that the policies they create, they don't even follow them. They don't, that's what's so crazy.
Mhm.
Why do you provide these policies when if people violate them, you don't hold them accountable? So, again, I'm glad I got out of there. But again, it was right before the Me Too thing, and I really wish I would have possibly done that, but I just didn't have the emotional energy for it. I just didn't. And again, it made me feel, again, coming from a different work environment in DC. Now, granted, I worked at the State Department. There's a lot of people from all over, foreign service, joint staff sort of, environment. And there's some crazy people, they've been all over the world, and they're just fun people, but never in a situation where it made me cringe every day to sit and listen to these guys talk. And I'm thinking, how is this even possible in this modern day that you don't think that's inappropriate? Um, so again, I don't even know how. But what I was going to say is, I think that I realized I was not alone. I wasn't the first person that did
Mm.
this because the way they reacted to my threat of an attorney, I knew immediately that this had been a situation that other people and other women had, brought up in the past. So
How disheartening was that to learn that there clearly had been previous complaints and yet the issue was still there and still so bad that it was forcing you to come in and complain?
Right. Well, I think it depends on where you are in the company and how long you've been there. And I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that, not too many people stay at jobs 20, 30 years anymore. I mean, I have some friends who did stay in their careers for the same place, but that's very rare anymore. So, you're a dime a dozen. And I think everyone can agree with that. Corporations just look at you as a number. And if, in fact, you think about the fact that they change the term of using employees to human capital. It's like you're just a thing, right? You're just a
Mhm.
part of this cog, or you're a cog in the chain. And but it's very sad because I think you have some control over it, but at the same time it's basically you against the company, and they have the power, and it's your career too. So the other question I always had after I left that place was, if I went somewhere else and needed, for example, a reference or confirmation of
Mhm.
employment, like what would they say? What were they allowed to divulge? And I don't think they were, but did that tarnish my great career record of having,
Mhm.
this wonderful work, you know, for 35, 40 years or
Mhm.
35 years. And I still don't know to this day, but that's another
Mhm.
concern. You worry about that tarnishing your employment record.
Right, because the legal answer would be that they're not allowed to say anything
Exactly.
negative other than, the dates that you worked there and would they or would they not rehire you. However, if you're dealing with people who are acting the way that they acted, are they even going to follow the legal situation in, not talking about you as a previous employee? I had the same situation and I ended up taking it off of my resume, but then that leads to a whole other concern because now
Exactly.
I have this lengthy gap. And I ended up with my current employer actually just saying, you know what, I'm going to tell you this story. And if it makes me not the right person for this job, then that's okay. But I want you to know why I feel the way I feel about integrity and ethics and morality in the workplace.
Hmm.
So you still struggle though with that feeling of that they have this little piece of control that they could utilize over you and speak negatively about you.
Oh, absolutely. And to your point, at this company, they were asking me to sign off on documentation that there's no way I would do it because it wasn't government,
Mhm.
approved or going by the book. And so to know that they were doing that and then chastising me for not following. So that, to me, again, it's all a lot of it's about money and greed and whatever they're making for the company. But at the same time, it's I think it's mortifying. And I wonder, I do wonder if it happens more to women. I have a feeling it does, because I can't imagine a man I don't know, maybe they do, but it's just amazing to me that they were trying to create this environment that just was so crazy. And at one point, they actually moved people out of offices that were seated near my office because they were investigating, and I'm thinking, it just made me,
Mhm.
sitting alone in this huge space then by myself. So it's like the game they play, right? And so again, I removed myself from corporate America at that point, and I've been pretty lucky since, just to be able to do other little gig jobs and things.
Mhm.
And again, my parents became ill, so I spent 3 or 4 years really focusing on their health and helping them, and they've now both passed. But I feel fortunate that I was there for that, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it was after this whole disaster of a job. And again, I feel sorry for people who deal with this, because, I know I'm pretty tough, and working on the East Coast, you have to be a little tougher. I
Mhm.
don't know. You just have to be, it's very, very much more fast paced. Let's just put it that way. And I just feel for people that have gone through this because I know I literally felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown because I thought I can't I don't know how to process that this is okay. Going into work and like you said at the beginning, this is like it's a relationship that is you have to endure for 8 hours a day,
Mhm.
of multiple people, multiple dynamics, and multiple personalities, and just the connections and the interactions, and yeah, that made it it was just miserable. It was miserable, but I'm so happy that I'm not in there anymore. But
I am also happy that you're not in there, and we're gonna talk about that in a moment, but I wanna hear a little bit about how this was affecting you outside of work, going through this every single day, like you said, for, 8 plus hours a day. What did that do to you even when you left that place
oh
every
my
day?
gosh, I couldn't sleep at night. That was my I think I probably drank a little more wine than usual, just because I couldn't sleep. I
Mhm,
couldn't sleep thinking about, oh my God, I have to go in there in the morning. Just facing these people. And then of course, after I had started complaining a little bit,
mhm,
then it almost got to a point too where, the manipulation started of they would do it. I remember doing a review, and this person gave me this horrible review, even though I had been helping this woman
mhm,
accelerate all this work that had been, put on hold for so long. And I'm thinking, and I fought him on it. I said, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about right here?" Well, this hat, and I said, "No." So it's just that whole dynamic too of that lying,
mhm,
manipulating, making you look bad. So yeah, I didn't sleep. I was just miserable. I just didn't feel good, and I think probably more than anything, I just felt depressed. I mean, I have my horse and all that, and I have lots of extracurricular, but the fact that again you have to go back into that relationship every day, that
mhm,
is so negative and toxic, and it's like you have to force yourself to get in there, right? And then you get in there and you just kind of hold your breath to make sure, or impending doom, is
mhm.
the cause of the day, right? So, yeah, I didn't feel great at all, and after I left, I was okay for several months after that because I worked things out, but
Mhm,
um, again, it made me feel just so depleted because had this. I've worked since I was 13 years old, and I'm 58, and I'm like, I have never in my life had anything like this happen because I'm a hardworking, ethical person,
mhm.
and to have that just thrown into the mix was more. It was mortifying. It was really mortifying. But again, I transitioned out of it, and um, I'm so glad I did because I
Mhm.
was lucky enough to be able to do that. Again, a lot of people aren't able to do it. So they just have to stick it out until they look for something else and hopefully find something else. So,
I have to take a moment to say that I cannot believe that you are 58 years old.
oh,
You look amazing, and I am gonna say, somehow I have a knack for finding people who look much, much younger than they actually are
oh,
to
that's
come on
funny.
this
Thank you. I
podcast.
guess that's a good thing,
So,
right?
yeah, that's a great thing, especially considering all the stress that you've been through.
Yeah.
You mentioned some of the issues that you had that to me sounded very much like retaliation, which again is legally not supposed to happen, but also again something that I experienced as well. My equipment started disappearing when I would show up, and yeah, it was really bizarre, but you can't really report that because you're just reporting it back to the people who are orchestrating what is happening to you. So did that make you feel even more helpless?
Yes, especially there was a new person that had started, and at first this person was very supportive. And then as soon as I started you know, I don't know if I was complaining or just mentioning things,
Mhm,
especially with the language that was being, spouted in the office. Because it was a professional environment. We had clients coming in and out all the time. Yeah, I just absolutely thought that the retaliatory part of it was even more degrading.
Mhm.
because you're right. You can't complain because it comes right back to these people, right? But I remember sitting in this meeting and them telling me, this, you did this wrong. I'm like, what? I saw, so it's so hard, and I think that's the other issue. The HR part of it. What do you do
Mhm.
other than start looking for another job, right?
Right.
And then in certain fields, you have this group of humans that is all in the same field, right? So you
Mhm.
can't necessarily go look for another job in that field because they'll know that they're going to tell. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's like a crapshoot, and it's catch 22. But I think I don't know how I made it through that, and I just remember the day I left, and I was sick to my stomach. I
Mhm.
just going in for that last day, that last conversation, that last sign off or whatever. And I thought this is really a sad statement on the current employment, situation in this country when these big companies can just treat people like this. And again, I should have filed something more. I just did not have the emotional energy to do it.
I can completely relate to that because I did, my situation was criminal, in nature as well.
Wow.
So I did, go to the authorities. However, because of political, situations and people that were involved, they did not want to take it any further. So the way I looked at it was I did all I could do. But again, I can totally relate to what you're saying, that you just didn't have the energy to go to EEOC and file that complaint, and kind of, I don't want to say drag it on even more, but then it's still just a part of your life for even
Exactly.
longer.
Very good point. Very good point. Because I think that's exactly how I felt. Once I got the attorney, and I mean, I drafted the whole letter because I just
Mhm.
put all the details. He looked at it, reviewed it, made a couple changes because I used to work in legal years and years ago. So I know how to draft a legal letter, but it was this, and you present it. But then you're exactly right. There's just no way I want, because it would have dragged on, right? And
Right.
then they would have, you know, had to interview me, and I couldn't face these people anymore. I just couldn't even be in their presence. You know what I'm saying?
I absolutely know what you're saying, and I want other people to hear that too, that, it's okay to just walk away sometimes,
Right,
that for your own peace and for your mental health and your wellness, sometimes you just have to close that door and be done with it.
right, right. And that's what's sad too. I think, as I've said, I know several people who've had jobs and they've kept the same job for 30 years and
Mhm,
just moved around the company, and the company has reorged and they're in a different spot and everything. But I think that's very rare nowadays. And I
mhm,
think the one good thing about the younger generation is they don't put up with, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if as my agent, I don't know. I've never quit a job. You know what I'm just saying? It's
mhm,
like I just don't have that in me. That's not part of my work ethic. But I think now they're just like, oh, hell no, you're not going to treat me like that, and which is a good thing. But at the
mm,
same time, then, they have to make sure they have another job. But yeah, it's a whole different work world now, I think. But I think that this whole situation for me was an eye opener. Again, as we've spoken to on many times here, is the HR facet of it that,
mhm.
people need to know. And I've told my son this. He's in New York City, and he had a situation at one point, and I said, just remember, always remember, HR is not there to protect you. HR is there to protect the company. So don't do this, or
Mhm.
so just keep track of everything, but just make sure that that it's a very true fact that they do not want to protect the employee. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, but they're there to save money, and they're there to
Mhm.
protect the company in the long run, legally and every other way. So
Right, and for me, that was very disheartening, I guess. I'm not one of those people who thinks the world is perfect and everything is fair. I understand that that's not the case, but it really hurt me, I think, when I went through that and saw that, wow, they're just gonna kick me to the curb and let this stuff happen because it's, financially better for them, it looks better for them in the media and things like that. So I was sad. Did you feel that way too?
I did. I felt depressed. Like I said, I felt sad and depressed because, again, I have a very strong work ethic,
Mm-hmm.
and I just was dumbfounded by how they were treating not only me, but just allowing for the environment to exist again with all this. Oh, we're going to have HR meetings. We're going to have a sexual harassment meeting. We're going to, and then they would come in and draw, male parts on the chalkboard before the meeting started. And I'm like, where are you know what I'm saying? So it's just the way it is, and I'm so glad I'm out of there. But again, it's I don't really understand HR now. After this experience, I just have never had to deal with it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now I really see the light. And if I ever happen to go back into the corporate world, which I do not want to do, nor do I even have any inkling to do, I will be very aware of that whole part of it.
I know. I feel like right now we should have scrolling on the screen, HR is not your friend, and just
HR sucks. I'm just kidding.
have that
No, I mean,
repeatedly.
again, and it's sad because you think about people who, and again, this happens to, I think, a lot of older people in my age range because, we are requiring these large salaries. So they'll also find any way possible. It's like I
Mhm.
was replaced by three millennials, I mean, I'm nothing against
Mm.
millennials. My son's a millennial. But because I've worked for so long, my salary
Mhm.
expectation is XYZ.
Right.
And there's, we can hire three people to replace you, and will you get more work done? Do they have the experience? I don't know, but they'll at least have more bodies. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So that's another part of that whole thing. But yeah, and a lot of the people were much younger than me, but some of them were in my age range. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing behaving like this in a work environment? And
Right.
but I think it's not uncommon. I think it's common, more common than not in a lot of places.
I do wanna point out that it shows what a badass you are that it took 3 people to replace you.
Well, I don't,
So
again, because, salary wise, if you think about,
Mhm.
I remember getting on LinkedIn at one point and there was a man, I was in an email chain and this man was saying, he's my age and he spent 10 hours talking to an HR person who's 24. Okay. And then they flew him to Chicago. He had an interview for 10 hours that day with six people. He got back to where he was from and this 24-year-old young woman said, "You did a super job." And he said, "What?" She said, "You did a super job, but we need five top candidates, and you're the third top candidate. So we need two more top candidates before we'll make a decision." So anyway, that whole
Mm.
thing was, this delayed. Oh my God, how much time do we have to spend to get a job now? But then this younger person piped in and said, "If you guys would just all retire, we wouldn't have this competition between the younger generation and the older." And I said, "Honey, if we could retire, if we could get, like, I think when my parents were young, I think it was 50 years old, you could get your social security or whatever. And of course, people are living longer now. So
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
work longer and whatever the case may be. But, and this man just said, if we could retire, we would. You don't understand that we don't get that social security till we're 62 or
Mhm.
67. So, and life is more expensive now. So a lot of people cannot afford to not work. Right. So there's that whole, conflict between let us have the jobs and then, well, we need to keep our job, but at the same time, our salaries are, if
Mhm.
you've been in the, workforce for a long time, it's just expected. And I think now young people make pretty darn good money right out of school or,
Mhm.
but yeah, there's always that conflict, but I don't really feel like a badass, but I just feel like I'm glad I could, put my foot down, and I
Mhm.
didn't. I think that's. I don't know about you, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have to do that because I didn't feel like it was right that
Mhm.
I had to make that decision. But I
Right.
did it. But I did because I couldn't. I was like getting an ulcer. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, it's just a sad state of affairs. But again, um, at some point they'll get busted or not, right? Depending on how the dominoes whatever tilt over, but
I like to believe in karma. That's
that's true.
I'm holding out hope that
Yeah.
karma will do its thing. So, you said you were taking notes and you were documenting for probably over a year. What was it for you the day that you said enough is enough? What was the tipping point or what made that day that day for you?
Well, the woman that I had gone over to help,
Mhm.
she had a lot of animosity toward me from the beginning because she felt threatened, I believe. Although I had no desire to even be in that
Mhm.
area. I was supposed to be over here and they put me over here. So we had lots of projects, and it's just a typical basic thing where you have a group working on a project and you copy everybody on the details
Mhm.
of the stats and all, everything that's going on, so everyone's in the loop, sort of. Look at, I'm using corporate terminology just talking to you. That's really scary. When I was at the State Department, they all used acronyms for everything and you had to learn a whole new
Oh, it's
language.
the
but
worst. Yes.
but the day that I just decided that was it was this woman. We had this project going on, and she had been sending emails that I was unaware of regarding process and status. And so I was completely out of the loop. And I found out because someone had asked me about the email. And I said,
Mhm.
"What email?" So she was walking by my office, and I had said, "Hey, what about this? Why did I not get copied?" And she yelled at me. She came in and she started screaming at me. And I was just looking at her. I honestly, all I can remember is I thought she looks like the Exorcist. I mean, she was like, spitting, like she was so mad. I was like, this is the most toxic environment I have ever been in my life. And I literally just sat there and I started kind of getting sick. You just kind of feel like you have no idea what to do because this person's completely out of control.
Mhm.
And I think she was also heavy. Like she would go out and party every night and come in she looked like she went out and partied
Mm.
every night. Anyway, younger, whatever. But and at that moment, when she screamed at me and left my office, I literally turned to my computer and I was just like, I'm fine. Oh, And so that was it. And then, the whole process with HR started because I went off this program.
Mhm.
Copied the top people that I was working with. I said, I'm done, not tolerating this anymore. Here's my documentation. And this just happened and I'm done. And that was like the straw that broke the camel's back.
So let's talk about what you're doing now. Where
Oh,
where did this take you?
well, after that, like I said, my parents were ill, and so my father got cancer, and my parents were married for 50 years, and they got divorced. So they had been divorced 10 years, and my father got sick, and then he passed away, and then as soon as he got passed away, my mother started getting sick. So the first 2 or 3 years, I was really kind of focused on that. But in the meantime, I've always wanted to write books. So I
Mhm.
thought, huh. So I just decided to put together my first collection. It was a collection of poetry that I've written since I was about in sixth grade. I've always written lyrical poetry, and I thought, I'm just going to put together a book. So I did it, and I found a self-publishing consultant, so to
Mhm.
speak. She helped me through that process, and I did it not to make money or, I just did that to because I really wanted to share it. So I did
Mhm.
that, and it went well. And then over the course of the next year or so, I was helping my mom, and she passed away during COVID. And then, of course, COVID hit. And so the
Mhm.
sad part about that was my mother had a stroke right before COVID hit in
Oh my
February of
gosh.
2020. And so we did not get to see our mom the last 6 months of her life in person. We could see her behind a window, but we couldn't go in and hold her hand so that was tragic. But
Mhm.
so during COVID, also as a single mom, I had for years tried online dating. So this is kind of a segue. But
Mhm.
so during COVID, my friend in LA kept saying, Cathy, you have got to write these stories down or you're going to forget them. And they're hilarious. And I said, I don't want to remember these stories. They're mortifying. They're ridiculous. And I think so many people can relate to that.
Mhm.
So I decided to put together a book about all my funny online dating experiences. And it's not just mine, it's other people's. But so I did that during COVID, and I published it in January of this year.
Mhm.
And it's considering it's self-published. I mean, I've been on the radio like twice in Denver and a bunch of podcasts. And the most bizarre thing about it is, and the book is called "These Stories Are True, I Shit You Not." So I'll tell you about that in a minute. But my friend, after I published it, said, have you heard of TikTok and Book Talk? And I said, what are you talking about? She goes, well, TikTok, because it was
Mhm.
very popular during COVID. She said, well, there's a platform or a part of TikTok, which is called Book Talk. and it's for writers, people who want to review, recommend, publish, all sorts of book related stuff that you can get on there like as a passive marketing platform. So I thought, oh, what the heck, So I get on there, and it's you have to create these little goofy videos, and you put text over it, you sing a song, or you do a little rap. And I've done great. But here's the weird thing: one of the chapters in my book is about online dating scammers, because I had that someone try to scam me, and I caught it really easily.
Mm-hmm.
But I did a 7-second video about that chapter where I just said, when a guy on a dating app says he's a US soldier stationed in Afghanistan and he just finished training, but he's going to take a nice hot bath, which of course we know does not happen.
Right.
And I put that on, and I swear as of today, it has 585,000 views. So I hit a nerve, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but the online dating part of it, it's like all my stories, it's just resonating with people because, oh, let me tell you so I could do a
Mm-hmm.
sequel based on everybody else's story. So that, my life has transitioned into that because I'm fortunate enough to be able to do that. I still do work as a consultant for the people in Washington, D.C. That wasn't always the case. It just kind of came back up about a year and a half ago during COVID,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone's remote. So I can work for them in Colorado, and they're so, but other than that, I just feel very fortunate that I found someone to help me write the book, not write the books, but self-publish them on
Mm-hmm.
Amazon. And so that's been a lot of fun. And of course, I have my horse, so I do that too. But
I love it. And I also have some people that I can send you for some stories for the next book.
okay, I
So,
swear. It's
yeah.
pretty crazy. It's you think I thought my stories were bad, then I'm like, oh my god, people tell me their stories and I'm like, oh my Lord in heaven, I thought mine were bad, but it's all fun, and it's just it resonates with so many people because we've all been through it, and it's just modern day, the way modern dating happens, it's just part of it.
And I love that you kind of took a lighthearted approach to it, because a lot of the things with online dating and catfishing and people trying to extort you or get money from you, it can be really rough. So
Right.
I love that you put a more lighthearted spin on it as well.
Well, that chapter in particular, that was I was so angry when that happened to. I mean, and I didn't get that far, but based on the comments on my TikTok,
Mhm.
I have 585,000 views. I want to say I have 5,000 comments,
Wow.
12,000 likes or whatever. But the comments, oh yeah, this guy, so it is funny in a way because people say, oh yeah, Jason Momoa just texted me last night, and so did John Statham, and so did Donny Osmond, and I was like, what? But then there are comments that people say, my sister-in-law sent $40,000 to a guy she never met. This lady sent 90,000. I'm like, again, we're speaking of relationships.
Mhm.
That's almost like a pivot of a conversation that this has created, because in my opinion, it really tells us the state of loneliness and
Mhm.
the depths of loneliness that some people can feel, that they feel that never meeting a person, never seeing their face, maybe talking on a phone with them, occasionally, but that desperation of thinking that that is okay is so sad to me. And again, my book was lighthearted, but this is almost transitioned
Mhm.
to, wow, what's going on? And these guys prey on it. They prey
Mhm.
on, and again, so I'm late 50s, and then so I look at people that are in the 60s and 70s who are either widowed or have
Mhm.
a lot of money. These women, right? That's who they prey on, like the older people, or not necessarily. There's a 45-year-old lady who gave money to a guy, and never met them,
Mhm.
never seen their face, nothing. So, speaking of relationships, that to me is so fascinating. What what creates the need to do that? What do you
Mhm.
think that's what does that fill for you, that you're giving away all your
Right.
money to the unknown, right? So,
That's another episode.
I know.
I would love to hear. Normally, I ask for relationship advice, and I am going to ask you for your best piece of relationship advice, but I would love to hear it in the context of work relationships.
Oh, I think that from my past experience that you know I don't necessarily always have a close relationship with people at work. We go in, we do, sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. The best experience I ever had was at the State Department. I became very close to all those people that I worked with. I'm not really sure why, but in retrospect, I think that in DC, everyone is highly educated and it's ridiculous. I mean, some people have
Mm,
3 master's degrees and this, I mean, it's like, why? I mean, but it's just the way that environment is. It's very status driven.
mhm.
And, I did this. Who do you know? Who do you work for? What do you know? That kind of thing. But when I moved to Colorado, I find that the relationships I had at work, women felt like more competition. Like
Right.
you're not at the same level, maybe educationally, or you haven't had the experiences here and there. So my only advice would be just to, look at people and appreciate where they are in their life, and this is where they are. I mean, I honestly worked at Home Depot for a couple months when my mom was sick because I had to do something, but I didn't want to
Mhm.
sit home while she was in the hospital. I was a cashier at home, and who cares? But I think just respect everybody in the workplace, and that's what I learned from this last place because there was a very high lack of respect for any sort of decorum or positivity. It was just very toxic. So, but I mean, I have great friends that I've met at work, and it's hard to balance that sometimes
Mhm.
because it's like you're there all day with the person and then you socialize with them. But advice wise, I would just say respect people and understand where they're coming from at that moment in time, not necessarily where they've been or where they're going, but just like right at that moment. So,
I love that.
mhm.
And I would love to add because you've mentioned it a couple times, kind of with the competition and particularly with women. And you know what? It's time for us to stop.
Oh, it
Like,
is.
ladies, I'm talking to you. Instead of stabbing each other in the back, let's straighten each other's crowns. There's enough of everything for all of us. So let's
That's a
help each
good
other
point.
out. Let's help each other out.
Yep. Good point.
We Thank you.
Mm.
We are gonna take a little turn here before I let you go.
Okay.
So I have a lot of tattoos. I know you can't see them right now because I have on this oddly colored shirt that kind of matches my skin.
Mhm.
Um, now I know you don't have any tattoos
No,
though.
not yet. Not
Not
yet.
yet. So
Yeah.
so see, I like it. So what I'm gonna ask you is let's say that tomorrow you are going to get a tattoo. It's not gonna hurt. It's going to be paid for. You can snap your fingers and make it disappear whenever you want and bring it back. So with all these rules and regs, what are you gonna get?
Well, I almost got one time. I dared my son to go skydiving with me, and I would get a tattoo, but he chickened out, and
Ah,
yeah. But and so I didn't get the tattoo. But my middle name is Rose, and a man that I was going to marry passed away from cancer, and he had a rose tattooed on his forearm, on his the inner part of his forearm. So I would either do a rose on my forearm or a lotus on my back. I have these things in my head. I just haven't done them
yeah.
yet.
Okay. Well, I like it. I like that you have some plans and ideas. I do have some good artists that I can recommend since
Okay.
I know where you are. So when you're ready, we can definitely make that happen.
Sounds good.
Where can people find you, Cathy? So if they want to grab the books, if they want to talk to you about your cashiering days at Home Depot, or if they want to take you up on going skydiving for a tattoo, where can people find you?
Okay, well, my website is catherineberra.com. So that's Catherine with a C, and my last name is Berra, Berra. And I'm also on TikTok under Catherine R. Author. And my email is sassypantspress@comcast.net. That's my horse's nickname. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me, and again, my book's called These Stories Are True, I Shit You Not. And it's a humorous look at online dating for the unsuspecting older human. So that's a long title, but that's what that is. But I'd love to hear from people, just even if stories, if they have more stories, to share. It's just fascinating to me how many of us have been through that of all ages, not just,
Right.
I mean, everybody in this day and age is on an online dating app of some sort or the other. And I think it's gotten crazier, but
I agree. I'm not on an online dating app. That would probably upset my husband. So I am steering clear. But people are going to start sending you stories.
I hope so.
Cathy, you have been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing not only about your really toxic work experience, but also how you have turned around and just done something completely different with your life and shown us how truly happy that you are after going through something so difficult. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it very much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on social media so you'll never miss what's going on. Remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it. Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're on the Spear Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.